This is Brad West with the Red Web, and we are at the Bob Bullock Texas State History Museum. We are guests of Dragons Are Comic Book and Fantasy, and we are promoting the Greater Austin Comic Con at the premiere of Shazam! The new movie, obviously, the DC Universe movie, came out tonight. Pretty awesome. We got some amazing cosplayers here with us. We've got the new and the classic. We've got some obscure, fun, extra cool ones. I mean, this is like not amazing over here, and like my gal pal Isis. So we've got definitely a wide variety of representation here, different people. And I want to see. Some of you already seen the movie. What did you think?
I thought it was a great movie.
That's coming from the sources. Here you go.
I loved it. I thought it was a really great movie. There were some elements in it that I kind of had some issues with, but I'm very old school.
So for modern audience, what do you think?
Great movie. It's probably one of the best DC's made yet.
Better than Aquaman?
Yes.
Really? Okay. We're gonna watch it after this, so we're gonna have to reserve judgment for you on that one. So, what was your absolute favorite thing about it?
We can't really spoil stuff.
Yeah, I'm not gonna spoil
Without
it.
spoiling it, like
They were
in general.
very true to a comic, so the source references were really good, and they stuck to it pretty good.
Cool. And what did you think about the actors and the characters that they got to play these characters?
I'm used to his stuff. He's a great actor.
Awesome.
I thought it was on point. They did a really great job. The problems they had with the script, but I think otherwise it was an amazing film. Really well portrayed, really safe. Villain, the guy who plays the villain, I'm not going to spoil that either because once I say that name, everybody's going to go, oh my god, yeah, of course.
Does everybody know? Does everybody not know who's playing the villain?
I'm not saying anything.
Okay. I know who's playing the villain, and I was kind of like,
I didn't know before I came in.
Oh, you didn't know before you came in? I thought I heard you were kind of double dipping in the DC villain pool, but okay, anyway, you'll have to figure that one out on your own. Well, we'll come back to you later, tell you what we thought, and make sure again you go and check out Dragon's Lair, and of course, Greater Austin Comic Con coming up in June. This is their second year. Last year was amazing, so we're only expecting more great things coming this year. And again, this is Brad West. We're going to be doing a special Shazam episode, telling you about the history of the characters from their days back to when Shazam was Captain Marvel was completely kicking Superman's butt, all the way up until the modern, where there's just like coming out against Marvel's Captain Marvel and all that kind of fun stuff. So thanks for checking us out, and we'll catch you soon.
I actually have a couple of things I wanted to say real quick. The Bullock Texas State History Museum is going to be having a really amazing exhibit coming up in July. For 6 months, It's going to be Cowboys in Space. And so it's going to be all about sci-fi, like Buck Rogers and Firefly, and they're actually going to have actual props from the TV shows and movies here, and it's going to be really amazing. So I highly suggest coming and checking out that exhibit when it comes out in July. Do check up on all new things from the Bullock Texas State History Museum on thestoryoftexas.com.
Cool. And of course, you know my co-host Greg, and I will probably be here to show you some more amazing fun things from that too. So keep checked in for cosplay news, comic book news, movie news, and everything in the superhero community. This is Brad West with the Red Web. And welcome to the Red Web. I'm Brad West, and today we're going to be talking about the Journey of Spider-Man's live action from the Electric Company all the way to the MCU. And talking with us today, of course, my co-host Greg. He's from Dragon's Lair, and he's a fountain of knowledge, so we love having him here. Today, I also have my husband, who y'all missed on the Phoenix episode, and I apologize for the Phoenix episode. I wasn't as prepared as I wanted to be, but I promise the Spider-Man one is going to be a lot better. And then Brandon, who comes from the Atrium gift shop at St. David's Hospital, he sells comic books there too, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's probably the only Spider-Man fan that I actually honestly think might know as much as me. Not necessarily more. So, anyway.
He's so modest.
I am so modest.
I know.
I'm obsessive about Spider-Man in every which way. So, and I have been since I was a kid. Obviously.
Well, same here.
Right?
Jeez, same.
I dressed up as Spider-Man during Halloween. You know, when
The
I was
whole
a
reason
kid.
I learned to sew
Power
was to
Records
be
was
Spider-Man.
awesome, by the way.
That's the
Power
whole reason I
Records.
learned to
Mark
sew.
of
was
the
sew on.
Man-Wolf.
Oh, I had that awful plastic. Okay, wait. We'll get back into that later. We'll compare Spidey fandom later. But tonight we're talking about live action adaptations of Spider-Man. There's actually a lot more than you think, and the behind the scenes drama is actually really super interesting if you get down to it. First off, I just want to throw this one out there. I know it's not super important, but the actual technical first Spider-Man appearance in live action was a fan film back in 1969, black and white. And I just like that, everybody thinks that fan films are a modern internet thing, and they aren't. So that was kind of cool. But moving on, the first officially Marvel-sanctioned Spider-Man appearance was
Electric Company.
the Electric Company.
The Spidey Super Stories. Yes.
Yes.
Narrated by Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super cool. And
Danny Segrin was actually Spidey. Danny Segrin actually dressed up in the Spidey suit, and he was a dancer and a puppeteer. He actually was Big Bird for Sesame Street whenever the main actor was sick, or when he would live out and made appearances as Big
Carson,
Bird.
right?
It was actually Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan
Ed
Show.
Sullivan Show, yeah, and stuff like that. So he actually did a lot of other stuff with Jim Henson. And he just happened to be Spidey, and I actually love that Spidey. That's one of the things I eventually want to cosplay when I lose some of this.
yeah, actually, my uncle had eye surgery and had the little screens to protect his eyes, and they're perfect for that. They're perfect for that. Electric Company, the fun thing about that was it was a dancer. He was a dancer, and so he pantomimed the whole entire thing. There was no actual speech. In fact, the closest to speech that Spider-Man had were speech bubbles. But then we move on to 1977 to 1978, the live-action Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man CBS series. So, do you want to talk about that some?
So I didn't know it existed until my friend showed me YouTube videos.
Yes, that's what I
was like.
I
was
watched
telling
it
you
on
earlier.
television live. I watched it on television when it first aired.
I
only-
remember watching it growing up,
Yeah.
and because I love the web shooting and I love the thing.
Oh, yes.
Of course,
It almost kind
growing-
of flipped out.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
the web shooting was backwards.
Yeah,
They wrapped
of
the
course,
web
growing
around,
up, no.
yanked it off, but
Yeah.
then they played it backwards to look like it was shooting out.
Yeah.
So that was actually kind of fun. Yeah, so Stan Lee actually publicly denounced the show. He hated it. But Marvel had him retract it because they're like, you're hurting the brand, Stan. You're hurting the brand. So he kind of made fun of that. Nicholas Hammond, who played Spider-Man, was actually previously... he does a lot of Canadian stuff, and he's still alive doing Canadian soap operas, I think. But he was most notably the youngest Van Trapp child singing in The Sound of Music. So that's kind of a little interesting
All right,
trivia.
cool.
You can...
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
you could pull that out at a party or something. But my favorite thing about it was two things. One, it was all practical effects. Obviously, there was no budget for CG. I mean, I don't even, CG
There
didn't
was no
exist.
such thing as
No,
CG.
actually, I've discovered there was, but that's another story. But anyway, yeah, practical
hear about that on the
effects.
way
The
home.
stunts were done. The stunt guys were swinging off of cranes over buildings, and they would drag him up a building to make him climb, and all kinds of crazy stuff. It was actually pretty fun. They did, however, it wasn't just a TV series. It was released foreignly as movies. So in other markets, they thought it was a movie. The origin story was part one, and the second one was, I think, The Deadly Dust. They made it into the Chinese web or something like that, and they did this two-part
And then
one from
also
that.
they were released on video as the movie format. I don't think they've ever released the television series in its entirety. unfortunately.
You can still get bootlegs at concerts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can
that's
officially.
about it.
I'm saying officially. I
And
would
I-
love for Marvel and to release them on DVD or Blu-ray. That would be
The first
amazing.
time I ever saw it, I was too young to. I barely remembered it, and it was at like a daycare school, and that was the only time. It wasn't until years later in their video that when I was actually saw them. So, but 1978, the same time. And this was kind of weird because, Stan Lee loved it, even though he hated the American one. Toei, Japanese company, started making a Japanese Spider-Man, and they went completely off book.
Oh, giant robots, everything.
Leopardon.
Yeah, Leopardon.
Yeah.
Basically
Leopardon.
he gets his power from an alien,
Yeah.
and he has a spaceship, and
Cosmic Marveler.
Marvel, yes, and from the planet Spider, I think was it the planet Spider or Spider Line or something like that. So it was actually kind of interesting, but Stanley loved it. He thought it was hilarious. He liked the interpretation and the creativity behind it. Shinji Todo, Japanese actor, played Spider-Man in that. Other than some other inappropriate stuff. Eventually, though, recently in the comic books, they've actually introduced that version of the character in the Spider-Verse comic book that inspired the Spider-Verse movie. And he's actually in the running, I don't know if I told you this, he's actually in the running for the characters that they're considering for Spider-Verse 2.
They better.
Yeah, I know,
That'd be
right?
Great.
Yeah.
I just hope that they don't do what they did in Spider-Verse and kill off the Spider-Man and his amazing friends.
Oh, I
Spider-Man.
know.
Oh, it was so deliciously sweet. I hated that. I hated that.
I was
so
more
much.
upset
I thought
about
that was the
the.
Twinkie. No. Well, you know what? We'll do a Spider-Verse one and talk
Yeah.
about the other
Yeah, we're
versions.
going
but-
off topic here.
Yeah, we're going off topic. So,
Live action,
yeah,
people.
Right, live action. So yeah, that was the '78 one, and those were fun. Then we move on to the early '80s. Now this is the infamous Roger Corman years when Roger Corman had the license from Marvel, and he had Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. I don't remember who
Doctor
else.
Strange.
Doctor Strange, yes, and
Now, was that the live action TV made for TV movie Doctor Strange, or was that a different Doctor Strange?
No,
that
okay,
was
so,
in, like,
the Doctor Strange thing is
60s.
another thing, and I can explain it to you. Is the
The
Jeffrey Combs?
Hasselhoff.
It's the Jeffrey.
Oh.
No, it was not Hasselhoff. It was Jeffrey Combs one that ended up Mordred the Mystic. That was
Yeah.
actually that was the one because he just recycled the script from Doctor Strange.
Okay.
And so yeah, they made another movie. It was the best Doctor Strange that wasn't Doctor Strange was Mordred the Magnificent. You'll have to look that up. Anyway, Roger Corman was mostly known for schlock horror movies like your Ed Wood kind of things, but he did the Fantastic Four movie
Well, he
basically.
did Death Race 2000.
Well, that was okay.
One of my favorite B films
Yeah.
of all time.
Yeah.
And he did Battle Beyond the Stars, which was one of
I
James
love
Cameron's
Battle
first
Beyond the
films.
Yeah, we just watched that.
That was
We-
actually one of James Cameron's first films. He was actually
Really?
started out as a model maker, and then he became like the head of special
Okay.
effects. And then you're like,
Well,
Yeah.
anyway, back to how it leads to Spider-Man, because this all connects. Everything does.
It's a web.
He was losing the rights to the Fantastic Four, and he just rushed a production to make sure that he could keep them longer. And he had no intention of releasing it. It was horrible. It was
has
horrible.
never seen the light of day
That's not
except
true.
for at cons.
You can get that at cons.
I've seen
I'm not endorsing bootlegging here, okay? I'm not-
Captain
You've actually seen
I've,
it.
I've seen it. I had it.
I have.
yeah,
Oh,
Red,
yeah, we-
Red Skull was Italian.
Yeah,
it was
okay.
horrible.
So anyway,
I
this
thought
is
Red Scroll was Italian in the Captain America
that's what he
movie.
was saying. The Captain America movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking Fantastic Four.
Okay. Well,
And I
anyway,
interacted with-
but
Okay,
you know
sorry.
that one did have a
Captain
pretty.
America with rubber ears.
Yeah, yeah. But that one, the Fantastic Four did have a pretty awesome Doctor Doom, however. But from there, Corman, he just decided, he was like, okay, cut my losses, and he let it go back. And it went over to Canon Films. Now, this is where all of the drama for Spider-Man, and you got to understand, it was really hard for Spider-Man to get into a movie for a long time. It took 25 years. 25 years for them to actually get it right from all of the licensing and
Well,
stuff.
they didn't understand who Spider-Man was.
Yeah, the Canon Films, the original writers, they thought it was something like a Wolfman. So the original, I'm not kidding. The original premise for Spider-Man movie was that a mad scientist in a lab deliberately infects Peter Parker, who's a photographer for their IDs at the lab, in order to get him to join his race, master mutant race or something. And yeah, he turns into like a giant spider thing. If you ever get a chance to watch Earth versus the Spider with Dan Aykroyd that Dan Aykroyd produced, that was actually the last Ray Harryhausen stop motion movie
wow.
before he passed on, and it's actually loosely adapted from that concept. It's really cool. It's actually really cool. But that's a whole other thing. So yeah, and basically Stan Lee, when he heard this, he was disgusted. Oh, he was cheesed. Man, he had no words. He actually made them rewrite the script, and it kept getting rewritten and rewritten. So that they went over to Carlco. Carlco started doing scripts, and this is not so bad ideas. They wanted Dr. Octopus, and at the time they wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this is like a preview before Mr. Freeze, Arnold Schwarzenegger to play Dr. Octopus. I'm not really sure. My notes are a little off.
Well,
on
it was
who.
James Cameron directing, right? So, I mean, he had a really good relationship
Well,
with
it actually
Arnold.
hadn't made it to James Cameron yet.
Oh, okay.
The writers who had it passed it off to James Cameron, and he tweaked it. But yeah, it did go to James Cameron. It had a lot of mileage on it. You've seen Amazing Spider-Man number 262?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Scott Leva, a actor / stuntman, I guess they needed somebody physical, just like Tom Holland or whatever, and he was actually pegged to play it. They did photography, they did principal photography, scouting locations. They had a lot of stuff down and to get it going, and they even started promoting it. There were posters.
Well, he
and-
was on the cover of
It was the
Yeah.
cover
Amazing Spider-Man
of
2.
Amazing
Yeah,
Spider-Man.
so-
Yeah.
And that was the first photo cover that Marvel ever had.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a nice little thing. And
It looked like it would have been so cool.
yep.
We'll see. I mean, I like that it was a classic suit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that it was a classic suit.
It looked
And
very
so,
classic.
Yeah.
I liked that in the old 70s show he had the utility belt and the web shooters on the outside. that always made me smile. But anyway, eventually,
Makes sense.
but yeah, eventually you're right. It did go over to James Cameron, and this is interesting because James Cameron, big name, you'd think, oh wow, we're gonna get this moving now, right? And everybody was a buzz in Hollywood, and it was in the trades and stuff. But basically, despite this, there was really low investment interest at all because Canon Films had produced Superman movies and Superman 3, which had just recently bombed. And also Canon decided, because they had the license to Masters of the Universe, it actually came down to a decision between Masters of the Universe and a Spider-Man movie. They chose Masters of the Universe, which was okay, but personally I think was a poor choice. But yeah, it bankrupted them. It bankrupted them. So that's how they lost those rights. Anybody? Introduction?
No,
I told you I could
go
talk this whole
ahead.
thing myself. Oh. Anyway, from there, the rights just kind of bounced around from studio to studio, director to director. They followed some directors. There were some mergers, blah, 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 wibbly wobbly, legal shenanigans, blah, blah, blah. And eventually, oh, by the way, 3 different companies right in a row went bankrupt after obtaining the Spider-Man rights. So that's
Well, I think it's
interesting.
important to mention why the Marvel kept pushing for the rights at this point, because I mean the industry was tanking, and so Marvel and DC were both shopping their superheroes everywhere to get movies to save them and pull them out of bankruptcy.
Yep, and they even tried doing it with TV shows because the Incredible Hulk movies at the time that were coming out, they were trying to use those as backdoor pilots for a Thor movie and a Daredevil, or Thor show and a Daredevil show.
The TV movies.
Yeah, the TV movies were intended to be the same thing. They were
Because
trying to
everybody loved the
reinvigorate.
Incredible Hulk from the 70s.
Exactly,
Oh, yeah.
and they were trying to reinvigorate that time of
And
when
you
they was
had
on.
already seen both those characters in that show, and
Yeah.
Yep. But
Daredevil.
anyway, eventually you're right. So early 90s, and this is the really, really interesting part that leads it all to Sony, is Avi Arad, who was a investor owner. He owned Toy Biz Toys, and it was they had the master license for Marvel's toys. And they actually made more money with the toys than Marvel was making with the comic books. And Marvel was, like you said, going into bankruptcy, so Avi Arad bought the company. He bought the company, restructured, he was filing for bankruptcy, and part of the restructure, he went to court to get the rights back. And the court actually agreed that he should be getting the rights back. However, they had landed at MGM, Universal Artists, United Artists, MGM United Artists, and they disputed it. Basically, they had to come down to, they traded off. United Artists got from Sony Columbia, they got the James Bond rights back.
James Bond.
And they let up.
Because that was at the time that there were the 2 James Bond movies came out in the one year.
Yes, because there were 2 different
Because
production companies.
James Bond was out in the wind at that time, and they wanted James Bond back. So to get James Bond back, they gave up Spider-Man.
And they figured, 2 competing companies making Spider-Man is just about as 2 competing companies making James Bond, though. So anyway, this is what led to Marvel Productions. Marvel Productions was Avi Arad's first restructuring thing, and they had basically, their intent was specifically to license out the characters and start making the money back. That's how they ended up at Sony. That's how Fox ended up with the X-Men, and that's how Universal ended up with so many guys and stuff like that.
Hulk.
So yeah, but the problem was is they were still hesitant. Sony was still hesitant. They had the rights, but nothing had really since the Batman, Tim Burton's Batman, nothing superhero had really struck a chord. And so, but in 2000, X-Men came out and did great. And it was enough to promote Marvel / Sony to make the movies. And so that went into production. And 2 years later, we have Tobey Maguire. So that's kind of interesting. Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire, everybody loves. So Sam Raimi, one of my favorite movies of all time is Evil Dead, and I watched Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness so many times. I annoy him. I really do annoy him. Every Halloween, I have to at least watch them.
Don't forget the Evil Dead TV show.
I know, I love the TV show, but it's gone. I'm sad. Anyway, but a lot of people don't remember, though, he had some really cool superhero cred with Darkman. Darkman was his basically his resume. That's what got Sony to hire him to do. And of course, Evil Dead, longtime friend, Bruce Campbell, one of my idols, made cameos in all 3 of the movies. And we'll bring up an interesting fact about him in a minute.
So with the Tobey Maguire ones, I had just gotten into comics kind of around this era. And I remember my dad took me to go see it, and I made him take me back 8 more times.
Nice.
I kept seeing it. I loved it so
I really
much.
think that the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man really catapulted Spider-Man back into the limelight.
Oh,
he was really
absolutely.
big in
I
the
mean,
70s,
they
and
were-
he was kind of fading out a little bit, and I think that Tobey Maguire Spider-Man
I mean, they
really brought him back.
steamrolled the box office every
Yeah.
time one came out.
You know, there were some interesting little facts about the script about that one. I previously blamed Sam Raimi. I apologize, Sam. It
Don't
actually
worry, he's apologized. To us too.
no. We're not even a part 3 yet. We're not even a part 3. That's a debacle. But I actually blamed him for the organic web shooters. It was actually the Cameron script that they only kept 3 elements from the Cameron script. One was the organic web shooter, and because quote unquote James Cameron said he thought that Peter making his own web shooters would push the suspension of disbelief too far. He did not believe the audience could understand that. So, just so you know, pandering. But the second one was to make it more modern. It was a genetically altered spider instead of a radioactive spider. And the third one, I think this one's kind of interesting. Like I said, y'all don't remember this, but I remember it. The first teaser trailer for Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, no, I know.
The first teaser trailer for Spider-Man came out, and it was a bank robbery, and they escape on a helicopter, and it gets caught in a web between the Twin Towers. That was their first teaser trailer, and there was a major fight scene scripted and filmed parts of that were supposed to be in the movie on the climax at the Twin Towers. And
They pulled it. It was released, I think, a week before.
Very close to
before 9/11,
Yeah.
and they pulled it.
They yanked it.
immediately.
Yeah.
they took
It
all
was
that out.
so bad that there's a PlayStation 1 game, PlayStation game of Spider-Man with a fight that takes place on top of the World Trade Center.
Is it based on the movie, probably?
No, it's not based on a movie because it's like Electro, I
Oh, okay.
think, or I forget which one it is.
Ooh, remind me
But
about
it's a
Electro. There's something about that.
Big battle that happens on top of the World Trade Center, and they have cut all the cinematic stuff that leads up to
it.
that
Yep.
fight. And
Even-
so you're just on a nondescript building.
Even in print, they redacted all of the posters because in the posters you got the reflection of the city in his lenses, and it has the Twin Towers in it, and they redacted all of those. If you can find one of those posters, because they're out there in the world, I've seen them. They're still existing, but that has the Twin Towers in it. Yeah, it was. I mean, understandable, but kind of crazy. So, yep. Now we get to Spider-Man 3, which was a disaster. So Sam Raimi only really wanted to do the classic characters, the Steve
And I
Ditko,
totally
Stan
agree
Lee.
with him. I think that his idea, and I mean, you can kind of see where he was going with the Sandman and the closure of the Green Goblin arc. And if they had just left it at that, it would have been amazing. But he was forced to put in the black costume. He was forced to put in Venom.
So Venom,
Yeah,
Venom was
Obvious.
huge in
Well,
the comics at the time.
Studio just jumped right in.
Yes, and he
it's
was tiny
you
in the
have
movie.
to
Yes, oh my God, exactly. But yeah,
say
so,
what?
He was
He's tiny
he
in
was
the
huge
movie.
in
Yeah,
the
he was
comic books.
small
He was
for
tiny in the movie.
But yeah, Venom was
Poor
huge,
Topher
and
Grace.
Poor
Avi
guy.
Arad insisted on Venom being part of it, and
Strong-armed
strong-armed him into it.
Yeah.
And that kind of just blew up in their face. And then he didn't learn his lesson because even though
Well, even after the movie came out, Avi Arad was like taking full credit for the Venom, saying that was the best part of the film, and
Well,
saying
fans
that
are
was
going,
his
no,
deal.
that really wasn't.
Yeah, no, because he thought that
That was the worst
yeah.
part.
But anyway, so Spider-Man 3 was meant to have John Malkovich as the Vulture. It would have predated
Four.
Four would have predated Michael Keaton, and also
Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway. This is fun. She was actually already signed to play Black Cat, which is funny because she eventually
Felicia
becomes Catwoman. And then, of course, they were going to reveal that Bruce Campbell, because of his multiple appearances and cameos to the other ones, was actually Mysterio. So this is Mysterio before we have our Mysterio. Spider-Man 2 was actually kind of interesting because Tobey Maguire suffered a back injury. And guess who they wanted to be the replacement? Jake Gyllenhaal, who is going to be the new Mysterio. So it's funny how things come back around and everything. I like that
And
very
again,
much.
I think that the reason why Spider-Man 4 failed is, from
Meddling.
what I heard, Avi Arad came to Sam Raimi and said, hey, we're going to learn a lesson from Spider-Man 3. We're only going to have the Vulture be the Vulture, and we're going to have Felicia Hardy be the Vulturess, be his sidekick, so that there won't be too many villains, and all this. And Sam Raimi said the fans will lynch us.
Well, basically...
And so he said, well, you can always quit. And the thing is, they already had the script and the things going for a reboot. which would have cost, I think, 1/3 less.
Yep, and that's what
Then-
leads us to the Amazing
yeah.
Spider-Man with Mark Webb and Drew Garfield, which was actually okay except for the basketball suit. 14, in my opinion, or 2014 came out with Amazing Spider-Man 2, which had too many characters. But basically, that's what led around to Sony sharing the licensing with Marvel. Now, here's the bad news, guys. 5 movies, only 5 movies were licensed. Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, Far From Home, and Homecoming. So they're going to be renegotiating soon. That's, you know, obviously they're making money with it. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. I do love that John Watts loves Spider-Man so much that he collects actual live, real, rare spiders. So, anyway.
Also, I think it's really cool that in a recent interview Tom Holland had with someone over in England, he talked about how cool it would be to have a Spider-Verse movie with Tobey Maguire.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We're going to put some more stuff probably on later.
Far From Home.
Check us out.